Hey everybody, welcome back to God's Plan Your Part. Today we are jumping into Lamentations. We're joyfully going into Lamentations. Not quite.
Oh, backwards.
So just so you understand, I'm going to take a second here and explain what is going on in the book if you're not familiar with the book. Lamentations was written as a lament. It's written in response to the fact that Jerusalem has been destroyed. If there's one thing you should have in your mind, if there's one picture you should have in your head, it is Jerusalem destroyed, the walls broken down, the temple broken down, the treasure carried off, and the people being laid waste. And that is what the author has in mind. The author is responding to all the things that have happened. We've been reading a lot about these things coming in Jeremiah. We read about the fall of Jerusalem in Jeremiah and 2nd Chronicles and 2nd Kings. And so Lamentations is a response to what has occurred. It's sort of understood that Jeremiah may have been the author of Lamentations, but the more I read about that, the more it seems like that might be kind of a stretch. So a lot of people are more comfortable saying the author of Lamentations is unknown. But the subject of Lamentations is certainly the fact that Jerusalem has been destroyed. And it's lamenting, it's crying about the fact that really God's plans on the surface seem to have stopped and ceased. So as we read over Lamentations, Jenny, I know you were excited with some insights already. So what do you have?
Well, first of all, I didn't realize that there was no known author. So that's really interesting. I also didn't realize how stinking short this book is, which is exciting because I was like, oh man, if I have to sit here and listen to 20 chapters of somebody crying, I'm going to be really sad. Anyway, so Lamentations is really interesting. It starts off by really talking about how the city is just laid to waste. It's totally
It's
on
empty.
its knees. It's done. But something that caught my eye was in verse 5 of chapter 1, it refers to Israel's transgressions. And our commentary Bible lists that as the transgressions being a willful breaking of God's law. So you have to really come back to that, because I think sometimes when you go full circle with it, any type of situation, sometimes you see things in different lenses. And so while they were going through it, while the Israelites were going through it and they were being sinful against God, then my view on them is wow, they're so dumb, they're so stupid. But then you read through Lamentations on the other side of things, and there's this in my heart, a little bit of pity, oh man, they're prisoners now, they've been taken away, they've been punished. And it's a good reminder to view it in a whole picture kind of idea, because they chose to break God's law. They were given reminder after reminder. And the sense that I'm getting from most of chapter 1 is again, our Bible says she took no thought of her future, meaning Israel didn't think about the consequences. I immediately think of this is just a full chapter of just regret and remorse and doubt for a temporary high, a temporary fix from what they were chasing after before the exile came.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, reading through the chapters and what it says about the people and how it kind of paints this picture of utter destruction, it is sad. It is disappointing. Yeah. Particularly as we've been reading God bringing about his purposes and his plans. What's interesting is that because Jerusalem is destroyed, because the temple is broken down, that doesn't mean that God's plans have stopped.
Right.
It doesn't mean that God's work has been ruined.
Well, and I noticed a verse in chapter 2, speaking of that destruction. Chapter 2, verse 6 says, "He has laid waste his booth like a garden, laid in ruins his meeting place. The Lord has made Zion forget festival and Sabbath, and in his fierce indignation has spurned king and priest." So, this is no accident. Oftentimes I always think, oh, poor God, it's so silly that I would even think that. But, God must be so sad and so disheartened. And I'm sure there's a sadness that comes with that. But, God is the one who allowed these things to happen. It wasn't just by chance that the Babylonians came in and took over these people. God allowed it to happen because of the disobedience of the Israelites. So, I think that is something to be, highlighted and reminded of. Like, this is no surprise to God. He allowed these things to happen. He's not sad. He's not sitting around crying because his temple is ruined. He allowed it to happen because of the sin of the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a verse that says he removed his right hand from his people, and so he
disowned his own.
He
sanctuary.
is punishing his people, but he's also removing his hand of blessing and saying, "Hey, you know what? You're going to live your life just like everybody else is living their lives because you've been blessed under obedience to me, but you're no longer obedient to me." Just so that you don't all believe that this book is very dark and very scary and very disappointing and sad.
Yeah.
I mean, it is called Lamentations. There is a little bit of a pivot point in chapter 3. It says in verse 21, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." So there is like 3 chapters so far of sadness. And then there's this slight pivot that's basically like, I am going to choose to remember this. And so this is a pretty significant part of the book. "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth." So basically they're saying, you know what? We are surrounded by despair. We are surrounded by disappointment. And we've made clear at this point that the disappointment is their fault. Right. And yet we can hope in the Lord because the Lord is good.
I was going to say, this part reminds me, like this book reminds me of like the intermission, like right after the intermission in a show, like the crazy doom is final. And now everybody's realizing that like it has happened. Like the city is all on its own. Like there is definite destruction that has happened. And now we're coming into a place where we're recognizing like, okay, we did mess up, but God is going to he's going to redeem us.
Yeah. And I think that, if anything, many of us who are believers have experienced that in our own lives. That, yes, we have lived as disobedient haters of God. I don't care what your life was like. I don't care if you were living wilding out or if you were peaceably confronting God. You were an enemy of God. And yet, in his grace, in his mercy, in his love, he predestined you to be a son, to be a daughter.
And I think that's like a pretty cool thing about what we believe, because our faith is such a unique one in that you don't have to guess, you don't have to guess the storyline. Like this story or this like historical event of the Israelites is one instance of the same kind of story that you and I will live out, and like over and over and over again throughout history. We don't have to guess what God is up to. His plan is very clear. We are a fallen people. We mess up. He sent a savior for us, and he sent a way out. And we have to we all have to go through that path at some point and recognize who he is in order to live a life eternally with him. So I think this is a really cool example, and I think a good reflection on your part for us today as we're considering what these chapters are saying to us and where maybe you fall. Maybe you have experienced this specific part of that story many years ago, or maybe just within the last several years of your life, or maybe you haven't experienced it yet, what it's like to hit this point where you recognize the sin and how far you have fallen from God and where he is taking you and the savior that he is and that you need in your life. So just maybe reflect on that today. Think about that. Where do you fall in your part of this story? So thanks for joining us for Lamentations. We'll be back for the tail end of it, I believe, tomorrow.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.